Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Cortex.
Thanks, Ganesh. Great to be here. My name is Tyler. I'm a software engineer at Canva, and yeah, we're really excited to start working with IDPs.
Well, thanks for being on the podcast. Today, I'm really excited to talk about a few different things. One, I want to start with the idea of internal tools and how it can be a source of leverage or how it can be a source of pain, or hopefully more the former internally. And then from there, we'll kind of talk about the build versus buy, how you think about the value of internal tools, and then maybe a little bit about the IDP journey at the end. So maybe we'll start it off with internal tools. Let's start with an interesting question. What is the best internal tool you've worked with in your entire career?
Oh man, best. I mean, there's so many dimensions to that, right? I mean, I'm tempted to just immediately say like source control because that's like the most fundamental thing in software development. You really need to, if we're still shipping around like zip files of versions of our software, like, all hope would be lost. But um, I think the best tools, it's really hard to identify that kind of thing, Uh, different people get different kind of value out of all different kind of internal tools, but um, when I think about that, I often think about the the same kind of metrics that I would judge a product that I get, something you buy off the shelf. It's the level of joy that I get out of using it, right? So, of course, there's fundamental things like your source control, but I have previous companies I've used things like package managers, which were these things that would you would only touch them every so often, but the just the interaction with it was such a delightful experience that it always gave you a positive experience using it. So I think it's often just comes down to um, yeah, the end user experience, and yeah, I think that kind of touches on the idea of treating your internal tool users as customers, and this idea that um, just because they're engineers inside your company doesn't mean they should have to suffer through some kind of rough experience, and like sometimes, get something working, get the tool off the ground where it needs to be, but other times it really pays to invest in these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everyone has seen the journey of these internal tools where you start by building some sort of really hacky internal UI, and then eventually people realize, oh, this is kind of useful. And then all of a sudden there's a team of 4 people around it, and then there's a designer, and then all of a sudden it's like an actual homegrown product, which, like you said, ideally brings joy. I remember one of the things that I really enjoyed, and this is, you know, maybe goes into the conversation about how you even define it, what an internal tool is. But I remember at my last job, we had invested a ton in our CI pipelines, and we had these like one-liner functions for Jenkins that were defined for different types of services. So you had a Java service, you could do like a build Java function or a build Python function, and you would get everything out of the box. It would do linting, it would do code coverage, it would do like the actual multi-stage deployments and all those things. And it was so nice to be able to start up a new service and just drop that in, or the feeling when you migrate an existing service, that new CI pipeline, it's like, this is amazing. Like seeing that one line Jenkins file was like so incredible. But, would you classify that as internal tooling? Where do you draw the line? Like, what does internal tooling even mean?
I don't draw any lines, and I think that's something that I have seen people, not struggle with, but I think it's easy to fall into a trap where you work on some things really hard, or you don't value certain things enough. And of course, prioritization is really important. You have to work on what's really important, and if you're a company and you're selling some sort of product, like that's your moneymaker, you have to sell that thing. Um, but there's just an immense amount of value you can get out of investing in your internal tooling as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean building it. I mean, we talk about build versus buy, but investing time in something or money in something, the point is to get some sort of result. And I think if you're sort of, working backwards from what people want to get out of it, you're generally going to have better results. But you talk about that journey that tooling and products can take. You start with an MVP, of course, and maybe it's something scrappy, put it together, but it does the job, and you build up and increase the value over time. It I really don't see a distinction between kind of internal tooling and external products, except for, of course, one is the one that's maybe directly funding things. But if your internal tools weren't bringing you some value indirectly, you wouldn't be doing it in the first place. if you are doing that sort of thing, then yeah, please rethink that. But it's maybe a little harder to measure the value of internal tooling, but it seems really obvious to me as a user of these tools that they of course bring a lot of value.
Yeah. That was exactly gonna be my next question, which is how do you think about capturing or talking about the value from an internal tool? So I think, even before we talk about build versus buy anything, the the understanding of what value we're getting is kind of a precursor to that entire conversation. So for internal tools, how do you think about like what does value mean? How do you go about assessing, like you said, as a user, it's very obvious to you, but how do you like turn that into here's how we explicitly talk about the ROI?
Yeah, I mean, delight is a hard thing to measure. Um, uh, and yeah, it's really case by case, right? So, for example, you own a developer tooling company, right? You've built that, and you almost get it for free, right? Because the value that you get out of using your internal tools is directly shown by the value that your customers give it to you. But um, I would actually put it back a little bit. It's not necessarily that easy to prove the value of your external products either, right? Of course, you can say, like, we have a lot of customers, we're getting a lot of revenue, and that is one way to measure it. But as I said, that's not necessarily a great way to measure delight. Who knows uh, how much more you could be giving to people in terms of the experience if it was built a certain way. Like um, I don't know of a good example for this, but like, uh, if you're sort of forced into using something because it's the only option, you don't necessarily know, if it might be better built a better way. So
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean,
it's
we
tough.
we faced that problem in the early days. I mean, before even it was called an IDP, and then after this market was called an IDP, how do you explain to prospects, to customers, what the value is?
Yeah.
And it's different for every organization. It's the same with internal tools. And I think one of the things that was, I mean, I don't know if this is unique to Cortex, but we thought about it as leverage, which is like, what are problems that enables you to solve in a way that's better than what it was before, or like if you can find those kinds of things, that's a clear clear answer for the value of an internal tool. I think the earlier example I was giving about Jenkins, like that CI cleanup is like obviously there's delight and obviously like that leads to better morale and retention and all those things. And like that's kind of like the intangible piece. But then there's also the idea of leverage, which is like, okay, well, now it actually enables when we want to update our CI pipelines or we want to, roll out a security fix, it gives me leverage because I can do it in one place and have it roll out to everything else. So like that concept of leverage, I think, has been really interesting. And I think that's where internal tools that succeed maybe are like implicitly capturing some sort of leverage that it brings to the team internally.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's again, just like any external product, it takes vision.
Yeah.
You have to be able to say, like, this kind of thing has value because, either I have experience, I've been in this place before, I know I'm gonna want to refactor those CI pipelines down the road, and this is gonna save me a lot of time. And that's something I'll be able to see concretely, measurably later.
Yeah.
But I know the value from my experience, having used it. So I think a lot of it is just sort of applying those same, instincts and experience that you have for any sort of product and applying it to internal tooling as well. Because, if as we've seen, it's very successful um, to be able to build companies out of these tools a lot of times. Um, and who knows, you might. There's plenty of examples. Amazon started off as a bookstore. I don't think anyone thinks of Amazon primarily, at least in our industry, as primarily as a retailer anymore, right? It's AWS. That's what we think of, and I don't know, like maybe they had the vision there from day one in '95 that it was going to be that big, but I'd guess not. So I think you have to let it lead you down potentially surprising paths, and just fill a need and keep building it.
Let's go like even earlier in the timeline. We're talking about the value of an internal tool, assuming that it's already been built. But how do you even get people to buy into building something internally in the first place, or like adopting some sort of new internal tool internally in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, internal tools, I think, do generally follow a different early product development life cycle, right? Um, it will often start off with someone just being frustrated with something, an engineer writing a script to solve a certain problem. It's, I think, pretty rare to start from a place where you have nothing and then do like a lot of internal product research, you know, like it's generally these things turn out to be kind of more grassroots things. It's not to say the only way to build these things internally, but in my experience, that's kind of the most successful tools are ones that you can trace their roots all the way back to someone's Perl script, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, so, part of it is I think having the kind of culture that allows that sort of artificial building and letting engineers build whatever they think they need to solve a certain problem and giving them the tools to do that, right? So it's a very sort of um, self-fulfilling thing in a way. Um, but yeah, it really is just about fulfilling a need, like an IDP, for example, right? It does a lot of different things. But for me, fundamentally, when I think about that, it's just about ownership and it's about having uh, a list of things that this company owns internally. This just a catalog of software, right? I mean, that's what it fundamentally boils down to.
Yeah.
And if you have no other metadata, just someone to contact about who owns this, what happens when it goes wrong, um, and like everything else is pretty much optional. But honestly, I think probably a lot of companies have IDPs in disguise.
Yeah.
Some way of finding out who owns that something. It might just be like an on-call tool, right? Something like that. It might be, someone listed in GitHub or whatever your source control is. It could probably take a lot of forms, but um, yeah, I think just seeing that there's a sort of a gap there and being able to build upon it and, probably realizing over time the amount of extra value it can bring, I would guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interestingly enough, the first feature we built at Cortex was ownership, because that was the problem I was setting out to solve. Was like, I got paged at 2 a.m. I don't know who owns this thing. There's like a Confluence page somewhere that somebody edited. You're trying to hunt these people down, and so like the first feature was like, I want a list of services. I want who owns it, and eventually, obviously, things grew from there. But is that how the IDP initiative started at Canva? Shifting gears to that.
Um, I think that is it roughly. Pretty much, I would be willing to guess that that's pretty much how it starts at a lot of companies. It's just this idea that um, we have either no idea what we own. You can go trawl through all the code and come up with a list of services, and probably a lot of people did that. I remember I just actually joined Canvas shortly after we had started our ADP project, so I can't speak firsthand to how it started. But I do remember one of my very first projects was building a dependency graph of all the internal services at Canva. And yeah, there's actually a lot of different ways. I mean, dependency can have a lot of different meanings, but um, I took the approach of trawling through Java import statements because this was like just backend Java services that we had at that time, and ended up building this GraphQL monstrosity. And honestly, I was surprised that I even got to the point where I had a visual graph. And it wasn't so much that the graph revealed a lot of like complexity that we didn't know we had. We kind of understood the state of things at an intuitive level, but being able to see that data and also sort of realizing that, yeah, maybe there's some value in being able to do this without a hacky script and
Yeah.
having a catalog that kind of build these kind of dependencies and show that kind of thing visually. Yeah, it's emergent behavior, I think, right? And once you have a certain capability like this, you start to see a lot of possibilities um, that you can build on top of it. So yeah, I honestly don't know what the original impetus was, but certainly I know a lot of the things that we got out of it early on. And it was all around the catalog.
Yeah. The scope, obviously has expanded quite a bit past like just the catalog piece of it. But um, do you feel like there was early value that was established with the catalog? Like, how did you think about, you were talking about joy, you're talking about the kind of usefulness of this information. Did you start to see people adopt this information? Because it's kind of like a chicken or the egg thing, right? Which is like the more people care about the data, the more they keep it up to date. But at the same time, it's not up to date. They don't really care about it. And like, you guys probably seeded that data, like you said, by building scripts and things like that. But yeah, was there initial value that people realized like, oh, this is solving something that we have? Like,
Yeah.
how do people react?
That is one of the tricky things, honestly, because the catalog it's sort of obvious to me. I take it for granted that the catalog has a lot of value, mostly because of the things we built on top of the catalog. So to me, the catalog is kind of a more fundamental foundational piece, right? Um, I don't really see people just like kind of crawling through the catalog for fun. I might do that just because I it's the space I work in, and having like data completion is like satisfying for me. Like, filling out forms is I've always, it is a little bit of a pleasure that I get out of doing things like that. But no, I don't necessarily think the catalog alone provides an immense amount of value. As I said, it's always sort of possible, difficult, but possible to get that information in other ways. I think it's what the catalog enables
Yep.
that really provides the value. And that's what we saw firsthand, actually. For a number of years, we were focusing on the catalog, and I think that was time well spent. But at some point, we looked back and saw our metrics, and it was like, it's exactly what I was saying. People weren't just looking at the catalog, and yeah, it makes sense, right? Why would they? Don't have a reason to do that. Of course, people did use it, but it wasn't like every person at the company is looking at the catalog every day.
Yeah, looking at your own services, like,
Yeah,
oh, like
yeah,
it looks nice.
yeah. I mean, there was usage, but it wasn't actually in that form. What the usage was that we saw was people calling the API. We developed like a dozen or more downstream users of that data, and when I think back to what we would have done without having the catalog. And to be honest, even with the catalog, I was tempted sometimes to build sort of an intermediate layer, an ownership service, because this is like fundamentally what people wanted was a way to look up an entity and find out who owned it, or the reverse, look up a person and find out what they owned. That's where I think sort of the initial value was, but it wasn't people doing this; it was services that were building on top of it and other internal tools.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the realizations that we came to very early on in our journey as well, because when we just had a catalog, which is the first thing we built, nobody really cared because they're like, oh, this is important, but it's not like it's not valuable enough for us to switch off from like our IDPs in disguise, which was the thing back then. But then scorecards was kinda like the inflection point for us because it was an application of that data. It was like, "Hey, here's the thing that's very concrete that you can now do with this stuff." And I think that's what, opens people's eyes like, "Oh, I see why I would invest in the catalog." And I think it sounds like people kind of had that same realization of like, "Oh, it's actually really valuable to have this stuff in a single place because it enables other things down the road." Um, I guess maybe, shifting gears, you guys went through, a pretty long journey in the IDP exploration. You built a lot on Backstage, obviously you're using Cortex today. What was that journey like? Why start on Backstage? Why switch? Like, is it related to like the stuff you built on top of the catalog? Like, how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I wasn't there initially, and for me, when I joined, and it was still just a proof of concept, to be honest. Like, Backstage was something that I sort of launched internally, but it was like I kind of took it for granted personally. Someone had already made that decision, um, and I don't think we did ever at that point any like good market research to see what options were available. But to be honest, is maybe looking through the Internet Archive, like it was actually pretty hard to find things in this space, and um, I think probably we would have started out with Backstage all along, just because it fit what we wanted to do at the time. I don't know if we would have been ready to commit to an off the shelf product at that time, even if we'd been able to find one. So, um, yeah, I do think Backstage served us in the space that we were looking for quite well for a number of years. And yeah, exactly what you were just saying, right? It wasn't until we realized that we wanted to just get a lot more direct value out of it and couple the catalog with our desire to improve operational excellence concerns. We had another team working on operational excellence completely separate from us, and we kind of realized over time, like kind of doing kind of roughly similar things. We're focused on the metadata for services, and they're focused on, you know, is that service performing to a certain standard, or is it meeting certain checklist items, things like that. There's like a natural overlap right there, which is exactly what scorecards provide. So, um, yeah, I don't know who first brought it up, but it was just like we should just team up and work on this together. So, yeah, it was. I think it was kind of uh, just serendipitous almost. We had this realization that we weren't actually seeing the full potential of the catalog. We had the catalog and we were, building small bits and bobs on it, but um yeah, I think scorecards for us was a huge eye opener, and it's just realization that we didn't have to constrain ourselves to being kind of a foundational layer. We could actually be something that was potentially a front page for developers, somewhere they could actually go and get some value out of, not just trawling through it like a phone book.
Yeah. The scorecarding bit is interesting because I think, a lot of our customers who have made a similar shift, in many cases, there's been a specific thing that they were trying to solve. And they're like, oh, this particular problem looks like a class of things that like Cortex can do well. And like, it's some sort of scorecard. Was that the initial like kind of impetus there? Like, was it the operational excellence use case that was like,
Yeah.
oh, we should probably look at, are there better ways to do this? Or was it like a generalized, we're looking at a class of things and we should look at all these things and see if there's something that can solve them for
Mm.
us?
It definitely was primarily operational excellence concerns that were that's our sort of first customer for scorecards. So the way we see with it, and the reliability platform is the name of the team that's in charge of that, and they've really been our partners in rolling out Cortex internally and developing the scorecards. So it was a little bit of both, though. I don't think we would have been nearly as excited about it if it had just been this one concern. I mean, the operational excellence is huge, very important thing, something I'm really passionate about. And even though I wasn't on that reliability platform, it was something I had been trying to push for a long time. And it's like rolling a really big ball up a hill. Like it's a really tough thing to push. So I was definitely very excited about it. But I think the real sort of um, the thing that made it obvious that we were definitely going to go down this route was knowing how much more applications for it there was. And Yeah, I mean, we didn't just roll out one scorecard initially. We have a second scorecard as well that's focused on code quality. So we've got, two dimensions there already, and we've got three more scorecards in the pipeline already. So um, yeah, if anything, it's the kind of thing where we're more worried about building too many scorecards and overwhelming people. So trying to keep sort of a really deliberate, tight rein on things. But no, I mean, I think scorecards is like one of those. Maybe it's an emergent thing. I don't know. Like, I can't say if I would have come up with it without having the catalog there already, but it just to me seems like an immediately obvious
Application.
win.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a great way to utilize the data.
Yeah. But shifting gears into like the build versus buy idea, and maybe we'll use this as kind of a practical application of it, but I want to talk about it more broadly as well. Um, Now, I'll be the first to say, like, Backstage is by no means a bad framework. Like, if you have the time, the energy, the technical chops, whatever, like, you can build a great IDP with it. But it is building. Like, it's not an off the shelf thing. You have to build your capabilities and whatnot. So, at least at Cortex, we consider Backstage to be like the build in the traditional build versus buy. It's not really like people building their own. It's like you're building on Backstage or you're like buying
Yeah.
Cortex. And so I guess, you guys had built quite a bit on Backstage. You had like, it was one of the more fully fleshed out Backstage instances we had seen. And so, this long into the journey, why decide to switch? Like, how did you think about build versus buy? Like, do we continue building? Do we go buy something now? How do we think about the sunken costs? How do we think about your future potential? Like what was that conversation like? Like, how do you even have this kind of conversation internally?
Yeah, well, it wasn't one conversation, it was about 100. Yeah. It took a long time, and to be honest, I wasn't convinced initially either. It took me a while to come around, and I think a little bit of that, like, I kept having this thought, like, am I just sort of emotionally attached to this thing that I helped build for so long? Like, and I've always considered myself a person that's sort of more pragmatic, and uh, it's not difficult for me to say, like, let's focus on the value here that we're bringing to customers, and if customers are having a better experience, like, I can take myself out of the equation. But it was still a challenge. I think what it comes down to is what you want to spend your time and energy on, right? And it's but there's probably a lot of sort of financial equations that you can do, like, is it a better use of your time to build something, or spend the money on that instead? But the thing uh that we struggled with is that it's actually, all things being equal, you can sort of do either one. um the time you spend has a monetary cost, of course. That's what I'm trying to say. But it's not always as easy to hire a bunch of people to build something as it is to just buy an off-the-shelf product. And the key thing is that, for something like an IDP, I don't think a lot of organizations are gonna have that many bespoke needs to where they will really benefit from building something internally because they're gonna be building something different. I think that's the real eye-opening piece for me that was kind of, you know, yes, we're gonna be building this and maybe we're gonna have like a lot more control or flexibility, but in the end, the product that we end up with will be very similar to the thing that we can get off the shelf. And we could have been spending all that time doing things that we value more highly, is focusing on the Canva specific concerns that we really wanted to wrangle. So it's just about what your competencies are as a company, what you want to be focusing on. And unless you're a company named Cortex, you probably don't want to be spending your time building an IDP. That's probably not what your real product is. And so, you know, of course, we spend a lot of time talking about internal tools. I don't think there's a conflict here, right? The tools that you want to build internally are the tools that are unique to you. So if you find something like an IDP, and if you're in a similar boat to us, where the IDP that you want to build is very similar to the IDP that already exists off the shelf, like what are you really getting out of that? I think that was um, sort of an eye-opening moment for us to kind of realize that we weren't building something special.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the idea of leverage, it's like build internal tools that give your organization unique leverage that are like truly custom to your organization
Yeah,
and you buy the things that are not. I guess the kind of last question I had for you was about the sunken costs. 'Cause I think, it's in many cases, it's easier to talk about the forward looking, like, oh, we want to start this initiative, or we've POC something for a little bit of time, and now we're going to decide whether it's a core competency or not, or whether we want to invest in it. But if you spend a significant amount of time and money and resources on it, it's almost more of a psychological game to say, like, do we just throw more at it? Like, do you just keep going and hope for the best? Like, or do we throw it away and like start from scratch almost? How did you guys think about that? And how do you think about it generally when it comes to internal
yeah.
tools?
Yeah, I mean, that came up a lot, but, of course, there's a reason why it's considered the sunken cost fallacy is because it is a psychological trick that you often fall into, but it is still a real cost, like, it is something that you actually paid, but I think for us and one of the ways that I, ended up thinking about this is we didn't waste our time, we built something that we used, and we got value out of it while we were using it. That wasn't, if I take that away, we would have been worse off. And at the same time, we didn't throw away all the stuff that we built. We actually reused quite a bit of it, sort of internally. All the data that we had spent years on. I mean, that's the real value is the data that still exists, of course. And the most important thing, of course, is all the stuff we learned along the way, and the friends we made along the way as well. But no, I don't think I would have been nearly as well equipped to set up Cortex as an IDP without all that experience building Backstage, honestly. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's not to say that you can't start from scratch with an off-the-shelf product, but I definitely think that we had a lot of hard-earned lessons that we still keep with us.
And there was probably a lot about where you wanna go. Like, you've learned so much, it's like, we've also learned where we wanna go next, and then you can go back to the question we were just talking about, which is, like, depending on where we wanna go next, is the next thing something we wanna keep building, or is that what we wanna just look for something off the shelf?
Yeah, I mean, you asked me before about the decision to do that, and while scorecards was a big deciding factor for us, we of course thought very briefly that maybe we could just build scorecards ourselves, right? And we actually built a POC for scorecards internally, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I think that was fundamentally what it was. This wasn't just like a small feature that we're going to add on because we added a lot of stuff into Backstage. But this was like a big platform level thing, and it was gonna take us a while, and we could maybe get to a pretty good point eventually. But then that's just another thing we have to own and maintain and build upon early, for forever. So um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. I know we're wrapping up here, but, whenever people talk about operational excellence, I'm always intrigued. maybe in the last couple minutes, if you want to quickly talk about what operational excellence means to you and what a good operational excellence
Yeah.
program looks like, maybe at a high level.
Um, for me, it comes down to 2 things, basically. It's, preventing incidents before they happen and not relying on, heroes in your organization to do that, basically with no incentive structure.
Yeah.
So both having the tools you need and the ability to sort of measure and show what can be done to easily improve your operational stance, but also building some sort of mechanism internally to actually reward people for doing that sort of work. Because I think so often that type of, I mean, anything non-feature, but especially operational excellence work gets it's the first thing that down on the backlog, right? And that's understandable, right? I mean, again, talking about products versus internal tools, like, one's the true moneymaker, and you got to prioritize as best you can. But what's the value in avoiding an incident? That's hard to put a price on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really loved the conversation. A lot to take away from internal tools and the value of joy and how to think about the build versus buy as well. But thank you so much for the insight.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.